20s, I had arrived in New York in 1962 with a laundry bag that I paid for with, I think, a dime, with all my belongings, and had no prospects. I did get a job through the Hospital Workers Union, 1199. And by 1967, I was being celebrated in French restaurants. My name was in the gossip columns. I was associating with the famous literary figures like Robert Lowell, and going to places where Arthur Miller and all these people were present, and invited to parties uptown. And I could see where a young person could be corrupted by that kind of scene, because I think New York, unlike the West, has that old European attitude toward artists and genius and talented people. And so you're sort of like smothered with affection. So I said if I'd remained in New York, I would have died of an overdose of affection. My working class origins, I think, saved me from that fate, because working class people are great detectors of phoniness and false flattery. And so I had an excellent companion in Carlo Blank, who was an avant-garde dancer and a star at Judson Church. And we decided to leave New York in 1967. I went to Los Angeles. I said I wanted to go to the most barbaric section of the country.
And we where I am right now.
We settled in Los Angeles. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think in my play, I imagine what would have happened if Basquiat had gone to Haiti instead of returning to New York. And he said at one point that New York was killing him. And that was true. New York killed him.
Well, the play is called The Slave Who Loved Caviar. And I want, for listeners who might be new to it, to understand its life cycle on the stage. Mm-hmm. It ran briefly at the Theater for the New City in December of 2021 into 2022, right, before it was pulled by the producer, mm-hmm, who had what she described as a, quote, emotional conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk a little bit about the play's run and what happened?
Well, we got a very good reception. And even though some of the Broadway theaters were lacking in audiences or closed down altogether because of the virus, we had a very good attendance and good reviews and enthusiastic receptions from the audience. I think what happened was I ran up against the powerful Warhol Foundation, which has millions at its disposal. I mean, maybe 200 million. We're very wealthy. And they objected to a flyer that I composed, because I was merely following Andy Warhol's technique of transforming things. So he transformed a photo of Prince, and the photographer took the Warhol Foundation to court, and she won in court. And then they have so much money, they appealed to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that his transforming, I think he did a silk screen of Prince, was all that much different from the original. So they lost in court. So I transformed a photo that Warhol took of Basquiat attired only in a jockstrap. And I ran across a painting in which Basquiat repeated the words leeches, parasites. So I covered his body with leeches, and I put Warhol's photo inside of each leech. And they said they were going to sue. And I sent that I sent that the original to Mia. They said we could. The poster I designed, I sent to Mia. They said we couldn't use that. Then we ran into a threatened lawsuit from Nina Nosei. That's not her real name. Who had set up a basement studio for Basquiat in her building, and according to
this was back in the 19. I mean, this is the 80s when he was working and alive.
Yeah, she brought him in from the streets. He's a graffiti artist, and that's how the legend goes. And she set him up there, and people who visited the basement where he was painting said he was treated like a slave, and it was like a dungeon. And he himself complained that he was her victim, and that she sold paintings that were not finished. And she would bring in these uptown people, and they would gawk at him, sort of like the French Angel. Not the French Angel, but that there was a movie about some freakish guy that these society people would go and see and gawk at. I compare that to Otherppl. Otherppl was a Twa, or what people call pygmy, and they brought him to the Bronx Zoo because they couldn't figure out whether he was human or an animal. And even the New York Times said he seemed to be enjoying himself in there. So I compared him to this Twa, who eventually committed suicide. You know, the kids were taunting him; they were throwing things at him. He eventually couldn't survive that situation. So I was quoting from other sources about her treatment of Basquiat, and then she threatened to sue. She threatened a lawsuit, and she got Linda Yablonsky, who's a friend of hers, write this hit job in Art's newspaper, which is circulated all over the world. Now, my spouse, my partner, Carla Blank, directed the play. And during the intermission, I went in the lobby, and there she was standing with Nina Nosei. I said, oh boy, am I going to get it? And so we posed for pictures. She's very friendly. It turns out she's hard of hearing, so she didn't hear how she was described in the first act. But then somebody sent her the script, and she threatened to sue. And so the play was supposed to return in February of last year. And there's no reason for it to be shut down, except that Crystal felt that it was attracting too much attention, and she was a friend of Nosei. So I was trying to portray, you see, the official line that you get about Warhol comes in the form of this play that was on Broadway. And I think they're going to make a movie out of it. And the Warhol Foundation told us that they had their play. They had their version of Warhol. And it turns out that this guy, this New Zealander, I don't have his name in hand, who did the play, Warhol is sanitized. He is sort of like a male nurse to this savage and primitive, has to clean up after him and pay his debts. And they take some liberties. They talk about Basquiat's drug habit, which is how Schnabel portrays him in that movie.
Julian Schnabel, the artist and filmmaker.
Yes, and they don't mention that Warhol was addicted to two drugs, which was revealed by John Giorno in The Great Demon Kings, his book, where he talks about that Lower East Side decadent cult down there, led by Warhol and William Burroughs. And so they sort of clean him up. There's some amazing lines in that play where Warhol says, well, Basquiat, why so much death in your work? I mean, he was a guy, he ran a death cult. I mean, there was Edie Sedgwick and a dancer who committed suicide. And when asked about their suicides, Warhol said, well, I wish I could have been there to film it. Herco was a dancer who was part of that circle. And Ron Tabal said it was amazing the way he treated some of the people, some of the younger people. And Dotson Rader wrote in the newspaper that, the young people around Warhol tend to die young. So here's this guy, and he he did photos of the electric chair. He paid for a photograph of a suicide victim that he got from the police, or he knew somebody in the police. I mean, he was really into some kind of death situation. But in the play, he's wondering why Basquiat is into so much death. And then at the end, we get a ebony and ivory ending. Remember that thing that Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder did, Ebony and Ivory?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, they're all pals and making up and loving each other. And Warhol really disses Basquiat, said he was dirty, he would never sleep with him, that he was a nuisance, and in one situation, and Warhol admits this in one of the books I use as a bibliography, part of my bibliography, he assaults him in Italy. He slaps him. And then he sort of like brags about it, boasts about his slapping of Basquiat. So I say these people, this decadent cult down there, killed this kid. He's only in his 20s. He committed suicide. He died of an overdose when he was 27. And one of his girlfriends, the only one, Powell, the only one who really cared about him, asked Warhol for an intervention. She said his drug habit has gotten out of control. And Warhol quipped, well, maybe he wants to be the first one to go out early.
So this play of yours, and just to make sure that listeners remain oriented, the play that you were describing is not your play. It was a play, or it is a play and possibly a movie that is basically sanctioned by the Warhol Foundation. Whereas your play, The Slave Who Loved Caviar, is essentially attempting to offer a reappraisal of the relationship between Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol, which in the popular culture, in the movie made by Julian Schnabel about Basquiat, also I think among the, what do you call them? The art set, the high-end community of art collectors and art journalists, there is this impression that Warhol was the benevolent mentor and father figure to Basquiat, and your play argues that it was quite the opposite.
Yeah, and Basquiat says that. He said that Warhol owes more to him than he to Warhol. And at one point he said that Warhol was lazy, even though from that play, The Collaboration, you would think that they contributed equally to this collaboration, which was a flop critically. But Basquiat says the opposite. He said he got Warhol to paint again. Warhol had stopped painting, and he got Warhol to paint again. And I read a few accounts where Warhol's reputation was on decline until he encountered Basquiat. And, have a vampire. As a matter of fact, they both went, Warhol was really into vampirism.
That was part of his nickname. His nickname was Drella.
Dracula and Cinderella. And when I found out that that from Journal, that Warhol was a foot fetishist, I really worked on that Cinderella angle. And I traced I traced the Cinderella legend all the way back to the Egyptians.
Okay, so Warhol's nickname is Drella, which interestingly, I spoke about with an author on this show not 6 months ago. It was a novelist named Nicole Flattery who wrote a book called Nothing Special, which is a fictional reimagining of Andy Warhol's factory scene through the eyes of one of these young girls who worked there. So it's not, Warhol barely even appears. I think he might appear kind of off camera almost once in the whole novel. It's about the sort of functionaries who made that place work and who were often kind of taken advantage of. So
right.
Just interesting that I'm talking about this again, but we had discussed his nickname Drella, which, as you said, is a combination of Dracula and Cinderella. Dracula because he was into vampires, like he just liked that sort of thing.
Well, I don't know. As a poet, I really ran with that image and some of the language around his relationship with Basquiat, in which it was said that Basquiat offered him new blood. So that's why I have these vampire figures in the play, because there's a lot of vampirism or images regarding vampirism and blood sucking and things like that in that relationship. And so I ran with that, where you got these the real Dracula, the son of Dracula, who's has an absent father, who's William Marshall, and Blackula, which is shown in one of the scenes, and he decides he wants to become a pop artist, and because if you can make money from just using everyday objects, like Warhol said that you can find your art in a grocery store, that anything in a grocery store like is art. He said he's been slaving all these centuries buying paintbrushes and oils and working. He said now, he can do some pop art and it's much easier, which is what Warhol said at one point. I mean, Warhol was a great deadpan comedian. I mean, so they asked him, well, why are you always copying people's stuff? He said, it's easier.
He probably wasn't lying.
No, he said it was easier. So, I've combined a lot of the stuff, the Cinderella legend, and what we have in the play are two forensics detectives who do a forensics examination of the relationship between Warhol and Basquiat.
Okay, yeah, let's stop there because I want people to get a sense of the play as it appears on the stage, try to give a visual representation. You have these two forensic detectives, as you just mentioned. Their names are Grace and Raksha. Mm-hmm. And they are working to, like you say, uncover the truth about this relationship between Basquiat and Warhol. And we get a lot of information about both of the artists and their relationship to one another through the dialogue between them. Mm-hmm. There is also, what is it? Van Helsing? Is Van Helsing
a detective,
the lead detective who's sort of coming in to check on them?
Yeah.
And then the kind of forensics scenes are intercut with scenes featuring a guy named Agent Antonio Wolf and then the vampire character Baron DeWitt.
Yeah.
And you have those two guys talking, Baron DeWitt being a vampiric artist in search of new blood, sort of a stand-in for the Warhol figure in your imagination. And what I found really interesting as I was reading the play was learning about all of these things that I did not know. And I have to cop to the fact that so much of the popular narratives around Warhol and Basquiat were sort of just lodged in my brain. I don't know if I've given it that much thought, but I just sort of imagined, they were buddies and Warhol was kind of a mentor figure. And this play makes you reconsider those notions pretty quickly. And there's a line in the play that I quite liked and which I underlined, involving the issue of story ownership, which is a great theme of this play and is also a great theme of your work. Mm-hmm. And the line says, quote, "Until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero." Mm-hmm. And so this is, among other things, an attempt to tell the story from the perspective of the lion.
Yes. From the lion. The lion probably being Basquiat, the hunter, or Warhol. Yeah, I think his point of view is left out, and even though it's not so difficult to obtain, Basquiat's, it was just ignored.
It's certainly there, and it's certainly there in his visual art. You point out that 80% of the faces in Basquiat paintings are angry.
Yeah. Well, they tried to talk about his influences as coming, his musical influences as coming from cool jazz, when he's more in the hot tradition, the tradition of Armstrong and Fletcher Henderson and those musicians who preceded bebop. Charlie Parker is very light, although he could get down when he wanted to. He could play gut bucket, like in that Kansas City series, but he's more aligned with the stuff that came before the cool. I mean, his stuff is very bold and in your face, and their politics were different. Even Basquiat did the defacement about the assassination or the killing of a graffiti artist by the New York police while Warhol hung out with the Reagans. Nancy Reagan did portraits of the Shah and these dictators. Party with the Reagan people. So they had their politics were in opposition.
And Basquiat and Warhol met in New York. I mean, I'm thinking of the movie where Basquiat was trying to sell his postcards, I think, or something to Warhol. I don't know how apocryphal that is or if it's true, but they somehow crossed paths in New York and did develop some kind of friendship.
Well, I don't know whether you would call it a friendship. Basquiat would show up at Warhol's building or his home, and Warhol would tell his aides to tell Basquiat he wasn't in, or didn't want to see him. I think what happened was Warhol really exploited him. As a matter of fact, that Basquiat paid Warhol rent.
I did not know that until I read your play.
At one point, Basquiat muses, well, maybe I'm just a flash in the pan. And Warhol says, if he's a flash in the pan, how am I going to get paid? And at the same time, he was living at the Ritz-Carlton. See, he's a young kid. He didn't know how to handle money. I mean, he would paint in these Armani suits and everything and get paint all over them. So, I mean, he's like these young rappers, they make millions of dollars and then all of a sudden they're broke or assassinated. Same things,
Well, and it's useful, and it's something else that this play does, is to put the relationship between Basquiat and Warhol into a cultural context in its time, and to also understand what the state of Andy Warhol's career was at that particular point in his life. His career was not in ascent when he met Basquiat. His paintings were not selling the way that they once had, and his station in the culture had diminished. And then he meets Basquiat, who is this young upstart graffiti artist. We kind of know the folklore around him as this graffiti artist, Samo, in tandem with, oh God, I'm forgetting, is it Al Diaz? Is that who the other guy was?
Keith Haring?
Yeah, I mean, just he was part of that graffiti artist scene and went by Samo. He tagged all of his graffiti in Lower Manhattan with the SAMO, which was short for same old shit, right? And so against that, we have the rise of hip hop in Lower Manhattan at that particular time. And you have that culture becoming mainstream and really igniting a lot of excitement in fans of music and art and all of it. So you can see how there might have been some opportunism in Andy Warhol embracing Basquiat and helping to advance him in some ways, collaborating with him.
As somebody who began his career in department stores and used some of the techniques he learned in department stores in his art, he was aware of trends and brands. So he just hooked on to the latest thing, which happened to be, these graffiti artists downtown. So I think that he had a commercial. There was an entrepreneurial side of Warhol. He did own property, and he did see, the value and the idea of increasing the value of art, where you get these middle class people didn't know any better, buying all these things, buying Brillo boxes and things.
And was Basquiat a fan of Warhol's work as a young artist? Yes or no? I mean,
I think Basquiat was attracted to Warhol because he's famous, and I think Basquiat wanted to be famous. But after that, there's very little they had in common. As a matter of fact, I think that Basquiat's career might have ended, this Eurocentric criticism. I don't use it. I use a lowercase e, because I've been to Europe, and Europeans are much more sophisticated about Black artists and art than Americans. I mean, jazz is like you find jazz in middle class homes in Europe. So I think that he challenged this way of looking at art, because there are traditions I point out in my play that Basquiat uses that they can't identify. Before I talked to a Native American named Charlotte Touchot, I think you pronounce her name, and she said that she worked in an art supply. She worked in an art supply store, and Basquiat was also an employee there. And she turned him on to Native American art. And if you look at his paintings, you see teepees and pictographs. And he was definitely influenced by Native American art. And they didn't identify that. They weren't capable of identifying that because, as Charlotte Chauchet said, they probably looked down upon Native American art. He also uses Haitian imagery, Baron Samedi, all these different entities that you find in Haitian art, and they couldn't identify that. So they were looking at it from a European perspective. And I've also seen the guy could paint. I've seen his parodies of so-called European masters. He does these great parodies of their work. So he was probably more sophisticated than those critics who called him a primitive. They were the primitives.
Yeah, there's so many, I think, like you say, so much symbolism in his work that people just didn't get.
Right.
They didn't pick up on it at all. And it's interesting as well to note, I mean, when you try to make sense of this relationship between Basquiat and Warhol, they are such an odd couple. Like there's no, like on the surface of it, it's like, why are these two guys hanging out? Other than like one wants to be famous and a famous artist and the other one is one. But there's also a huge age difference. Basquiat died at age 27. He was a kid for all intents and purposes throughout the entirety of the relationship. So there was a great power imbalance in the relationship, not only in terms of Warhol's money and state of influence in the culture, but also in terms of life experience. Basquiat, like you said, he was wearing Armani suits and getting paint all over them, and he didn't really know what he was up against, perhaps.
Yeah, well, he was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And influenced by maybe some of the wrong people. Like he said his favorite book was Junkie by William Burroughs. I mean, God, this is the Great Demon Kings. Journal shows Burroughs as somebody who had an off-the-street heroin operation, where he could come off the streets and get injected with heroin, and he'd always do the first injection because he didn't want to get AIDS. So, because one of the connections I try to make is that, or one of the points I tried to make was that it seemed that Basquiat was looking for a Black mentor, an older Black person. And I came to this play while finishing up another play, and all of a sudden these coincidences began to pile up where Basquiat's name would come up. And finally, I was on a TV show, and one of the guests was a sculptor who, at one time, I think he had something in Times Square or something. He's now very famous, but at the time, in the 80s, he was delivering art supplies. And he delivered some supplies, I guess, to the basement where Basquiat was painting. And Basquiat invited him to a show, and he didn't show up. And then later I learned that when he came to San Francisco, he was seeking out an older Black painter named Ray Saunders. And that didn't happen. So I said, this guy was looking for a mentor. And it was that walk to the subway when this sculptor told me about this. I said, all these things are adding up. Maybe I should write a play about Basquiat and Warhol.
That was it.
Yeah.
Well, there's another line in the book that I underlined, which speaks to what you were just talking about. And it has to do with Basquiat's youth and his very short life, and the fact that he came from a troubled home. He, you say Basquiat was even more like Cinderella than Warhol, abandoned by his father and a schizophrenic mother. And then later you say, quote, he thought an artistic family would substitute for his mother and father.
Right.
So this was a kind of an orphaned kid for all intents and purposes who was desperately in search of family.
Well, you can tell I'd been in New York because I use a Freudian analysis.
But I find it poignant. I think there. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you don't want to overstate it, but I do think there's more than a grain of truth.
That became his family. Now his mother encouraged his art, she took him to museums and bought him books. I think she bought him the Leonardo da Vinci.
Grey's Anatomy,
Excuse me, Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, his stuff his drawings are excellent, of the human body. But his father, I think, was one of these bourgeois Haitians. I don't know whether he's from Haiti. The mother was from Haiti. I think the father was from Jamaica, I believe.
Or no, it was Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's one of these. I think he's one of these bourgeois guys who are anti-art. I think you find it a lot in ethnic communities. I'm getting correspondence from a famous writer right now who says, her family does. I said, well, that's ethnic communities. So anyway, they didn't get along, and I think that he was looking for a substitute family, as you said.
But he never really found a mentor, especially once the money started coming in. Mm-hmm. Then it's like once that starts.
He was, Mary. What's her name? Mary Boone. What's her name? One of his. I mean, he was surrounded by corrupt people. I mean, his art dealer, who's sort of like cleaned up in that collaborator, she went to prison for tax evasion. You remember that story where she was using money to buy luxurious items and things,
right?
But she was, she was a gallery owner and one of his representatives. So he had a lot of corrupt people around him.
Well, I think I've had this conversation on this show before. It's something I have noted over the years, like observing from afar the world of high art, mm-hmm. the trade of really expensive paintings and the mm-hmm. culture that surrounds it. That is an almost impenetrable scene for me. Like, how does this work? Who are the kingmakers in these communities, and how does an artist like Basquiat take off? Like, obviously an association with Andy Warhol doesn't hurt, but it's just interesting to me the way that it happens, where certain mm-hmm. artists kind of get, they get blessed, mm-hmm. and the money starts to become like absurd really quickly. And I think when the money becomes absurd, that's when bad actors tend to gravitate or, show up and take advantage or try to take advantage.
Well, he had his girlfriends who exploited him. One of them sold that refrigerator to Sotheby's for $5,000.
Oh, right, that he painted on.
Yeah. But you know how it comes across in the collaborator, the play? She comes to, there's in the play, her name is Maya. She comes to the loft there where Warhol's present, and she wants money. She wants money to pay for an abortion because she's pregnant by Basquiat, right? And the actual person couldn't have children, number one. And she says that she wanted the money to pay the rent. But they sort of like ease that in there, this black monster corrupting white women. They had to kind of sneak that thing in there. It was totally corrupt. So I think that he paid in the end. He was used by everybody. I mean, finally they just drained him of his talent and his blood, and then the critics did the coup de grace, that morally safer
60
scene,
minutes.
Yeah, where he says, well, the only thing now that he's dead of overdose, he's going to become famous or something like that. Just cruel.
Yeah, and there's another, who is that art critic? I'm blanking on his name, but there's a passage that you quote in the play from that art critic, which is really kind of ugly. And, there is as well a tradition that you mm-hmm. bring to the fore in this play of Western white artists who quote unquote go black when they run out of ideas. And it's not something I had put enough thought into, but it's like, you talk about Picasso embracing African art.
Oh yeah, sure.
You talk about Irving Berlin stealing music from Scott Joplin.
Yeah.
I think in the popular culture,
Alexander's Right Time Band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Elvis, obviously, and I think in music is maybe where the culture, it's more prevalent, and where I've heard conversation about it is white musicians appropriating black musical idiom.
They got this thing on that premiered Sunday, True Detective with I don't know if you saw this, but they were saying that Twist and Shout was invented by the Beatles. It was the Four Tops, and then the Isley Brothers who did Twist and Shout. But in this series, it begins with Beatles getting credit for Twist and Shout. So it happens all the time in music. Stravinsky did Ragtime. You know, I mean, it's just new blood. It's like a renewal when they come in contact with black art.
Well, speaking of this sort of thing, another thing that this play does is it offers a reappraisal of the Julian Schnabel film. We mentioned Julian Schnabel earlier. But listen, I think in the popular culture, most people's understanding of Basquiat as a human being, like any kind of biographical understanding of Basquiat, is more likely than not to be drawn from that film, at least for a certain generation. My generation, like, I remember that film came out, it was considered cool. It was like, oh, Basquiat, and it's this, you know, and I think a lot of people draw their understanding of him and his life and his work from that film, at least in part. And there's a quote from Jim Jarmusch, the filmmaker, who says that he wouldn't see the film because he knew that Basquiat and Schnabel were not films, that Basquiat was not a fan of Schnabel's when he was alive, and that they were, in fact, rivals. Yeah. And you make a great point, or the play makes a great point, that like it would be like Sonny Liston making Joe Frazier. Yeah, sorry.
Making a film about Muhammad Ali.
That's right. That's right. So it's interesting that someone would make a film, a biopic about an artistic rival of theirs, a contemporary. And I don't know if most people who see that film realize that this was the fact.
Well, it shows him stumbling around the village and, living in cardboard boxes. I mean, the scene that I thought was the most revealing was when they go there. There's a scene in Warhol's loft of the factory where there are paintings of Schnabel, who's very young and lean, and these paintings were never done. He made that up. And then there's a scene where I thought revealing as well was when Basquiat draws a picture of Schnabel's daughter, and Schnabel puts down the drawing and says, "Oh, you look better than that." And then the scene where he urinates in the stairway, and when Schnabel goes on television, he says, "Well, he was marking his territory by scent." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's what animals do." I mean, it implies that, he's sort of like animalistic. And there's some other digs at him throughout the film. So I call it Julian Schnabel's home movie, because he has his relatives in it, and it's sort of like a movie where he aggrandizes himself over that of a dead man. Now, even Jeffrey Wright, who's a good guy, since he bought all of his dinner, came to my play and bought. So he's a good guy.
Good actor.
Great actor. He might get an Academy Award.
That's right.
But he denounced that role. He said that the role he played, he said that Schnabel showed Basquiat as passive when Basquiat was really dangerous.
And that is, I think that something that I come away from this play thinking a lot about is obviously Basquiat got to speak for himself in his paintings. That's the place to find him. But because he had a very limited family life, and because he was so young when he became famous, I think that hinders a person's ability maybe to form solid friendships because you don't know quite who's sincere in their friendship and who's trying to get something from you. So it creates a vacuum in a situation where he so rarely got to speak for himself. And because he died so young, that vacuum gets filled with things like Julian Schnabel's film and other people, telling stories and talking from limited perspectives. But we never hear from Basquiat himself. And I think that's kind of part of what this play is attempting to examine and to rectify. And I think that the statistic that I pointed to earlier, which appears in the play, that there are so many angry faces in Basquiat paintings. As soon as I read that, I was like, yes, that's true. Like you think about his work and the skulls and the little cartoon faces or whatever you want to call them that he would draw, not a lot of smiles. And there was a real ferocity, like a ferocious intelligence, but also an anger in him and an almost real-time response because he was so prolific and was working so hard, often under the influence of drugs, which is something else we can talk about. He was often in his work responding in real time to things that he was seeing in the culture and in the news.
In connection with the research of this play, I found that the slave owners gave their slaves cocaine.
I didn't know that until I read this.
I didn't know it either. Until I stumbled upon the research, and that increased production. And I think that's what happened at No Say's basement, because he was painting around the clock, and cocaine was available. And see, my point about her, or that situation, is that I was in some, uptown places like the Dakota, where people had drugs, but they were so wealthy, there was no issue of it. And so I said that there was cocaine. One person said that in that basement, there was cocaine everywhere. And this was at a time when thousands of Black and Puerto Rican kids were getting busted for a joint, for possession. So that was something to take note of. But I think she knew he was taking cocaine, but she looked the other way. I didn't say that she was responsible for his taking cocaine, but I think people just sort of like looked the other way.
As long as he keeps making these paintings a week, make 6 or 7 paintings a week is what he was doing.
I think that's what started his really serious drug addiction. That scene where he just had a lot of cocaine.
The, I think, most poignant section of the play is this kind of imagined monologue by Richard Pryor, who had a relationship with Basquiat, which I did not know about.
They met, yeah.
And I think the play posits that Basquiat was happy and sober in Hawaii. He made some trips.
So was Richard Pryor.
Yeah, as was Richard Pryor.
Right.
And so it's kind of this wistful, mournful imagining of what might have happened to Basquiat had he been able to escape New York and go to a place like Hawaii or go to Haiti and settle down and get away and get sober and leave behind all of these opportunists who were taking advantage of him and putting pressure on him that was not good for him.
Well, I didn't go to Haiti or Hawaii. I went to Los Angeles. And the way I was treated in New York, I mean, I was like, just sought after. So I went to Los Angeles. I was living in this, my wife, Carla, she was working up in the mountains at a camp that was run by Eddie Rickenbacker. Remember him?
No.
Eddie Rickenbacker, the Flying Tigers in World War II.
Oh, okay.
A real right winger. And she was teaching a theater class up there. And there were all these blonde, blue-eyed people who were plotting the right-wing takeover even then, in the 1960s. And so I was in this apartment all alone, most of the time, writing my second novel, Yellowback Radio Broke Down, which Richard Pryor stole and took to Blazing Saddles. And there's an article coming out about that, and there's a book been published on that. And my only regular companion was an old white guy named Old Man Mason. He wore a Stetson hat.
Where were you? Were you in Los Angeles or were you up in the hills?
I was in Los Angeles.
But what part of town?
Echo Park Canyon.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And right down from Amy McPherson's temple. And ironically, my wife wrote a big article about Amy McPherson a couple of years ago and got nominated for a Los Angeles Press Club Award. But how history turns around and around. But anyway, I was there in this apartment working on my second novel. I didn't have a car. I had a friend named Robert Grover, who was a millionaire at that point. He'd bring me out to Malibu on the weekends, but I was just all alone. So that was my Hawaii and that was my Haiti. Because I think, as I said, if I remained in New York, I would have died of an overdose of affection. and he died of an overdose of affection and maybe contempt at the same time.
Well, I want to talk to you a bit about your life and career while I have you.
Sure.
And you mentioned Los Angeles. You mentioned this move to California. It is where you have spent the bulk of your life now. You've lived in Northern California, in Berkeley, and then in Oakland. That is where you have made your life. But you began your life in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I read that your mother commissioned your very first piece of writing.
Yeah, she did.
So can you just talk a little bit about that? I guess that might be the case for a lot of writers now that I think about it, but she paid you to write a poem.
I wrote about that in New York Review of Books. There's an article I wrote a few months ago entitled "The Buffalo I Knew," and I got a photo of my mother there. My mother finally wrote a book herself. So she was you might call her a union organizer without a union. So she participated in 2 strikes that she organized. One was for hotel workers, and that led to better pay for these black women who were working in the hotel downtown Statler, the Statler Hotel.
In Buffalo.
Yeah. And then
because you moved, just so people are oriented, you were born in Chattanooga and then moved to Buffalo.
When I was about 4 years old.
When you were 4 years old, okay.
And then she organized a strike at a department store because the black women were consigned to stock work and not sales. And she became the first black salesperson after organizing a strike. And they had her attend a birthday party. So there's the photos in the New York Review books where she's the only black person there at this party. And she asked me to write a poem for the person who was being honored on her birthday. So I did a rhyme piece. I never met the woman. And I've been rhyming ever since, which is considered like square. I mean, it's considered, after free verse. Free verse dominates the poetry scene, which is sort of like compressed short stories. And I think a lot of people don't rhyme because they don't have the ear. So Carolyn Kaiser, the Pulitzer Prize winner, said I had the ear. So I'm getting an interview in a couple of hours about a poem I wrote about the Golden State Warriors basketball team. That's a hit out here, and it's in rhyme. So I rhyme a lot. But
what'd you get paid? What'd you get paid for that first poem?
I don't remember how much she paid me. I don't remember, but she said, when you go on, she called me GW after George. I was named after George Washington, my nickname. I was born on February 22nd. She said, GW, I want you to write a poem for this woman. So I wrote it, and that was my first commissioned poem. But I've done public poetry. My poetry's on sidewalks out here. I got a poem as part of an installation at the BART station in Richmond. And I got a poem in the Jazz Center in the alley there. They did a poem about going jazz heaven. When I die, let them go to heaven, let them go to hell. When I die, I want to go to jazz. And they did that. It's an alley called the alley is called Raise Up Off Me Alley on Franklin Street, near Franklin Street. And it was named after the autobiography of Hampton Hawes, the pianist. The title of his autobiography, Raise Up Off Me. And he was in Lexington for narcotics possession, and he's pardoned by Kennedy.
Oh.
Kennedy says, the only thing this guy wants to do is play piano, man. Let him out,
Right.
So,
well, this speaks to something else I wanted to talk to you about
Yeah.
is the breadth of your interests. You're a very prolific writer. You write a lot, you publish a lot, but you also write and publish in a variety of different genres, everything from poetry, novels, stories, nonfiction, essay. I mean, you do it all, and very heavily influenced by jazz music as well. There's also,
jazz.
yeah,
Jazz, yeah.
So you got a lot going on. Can you just talk about that part of your creative life and the fact that you are, polyphonic? You kind of express yourself in all of these different modes?
Well, the kind of writer I am, I have to do different things to get through. to get attention, or get people to make remarks about my work. So if the New York Times hasn't reviewed a book of mine since a long time. I've had about 7 books out. They've ignored them. So part of my strategy is a global strategy. So I studied Japanese and wrote a novel called Japanese by Spring, which is ironic because you can't learn Japanese by spring. But I was thinking, one of these, learn Italian in 2 weeks,
Right.
And that got me a trip to Japan. And as a result of that novel, I was invited twice to China. And the last visit, I went to Beijing first. I was invited to Beijing. Then I went to Hunan. And my spouse, Carla Blank, directed a play here, a play in Hunan with all Chinese cast that was banned here. PBS was supposed to do it. They backed out. So I had to go to a totalitarian country to get it done. So I think I try to do an international audience in order to survive. I know what happens to Black writers when they get pigeonholed. So I studied one of Chopin's nocturnes on the piano for about 4 months under a Ukrainian instructor on Zoom. The guy's town's being bombed. He's teaching me. And I wrote a poem about that, which is going to be published in Polish. So I just found that the way I should survive is to do multiple genres. If they stop you in the theater, you go to an op-ed. If they stop you in op-ed, you can go to a poem. It's like a full court press, what they call a basketball. So that's my global strategy.
Well, you have said, I think that my greatest accomplishment has been to write in different languages and genres and to maintain a Black and multicultural fan base in this country and in other countries.
Right.
I have never heard a writer. I've done a lot of these conversations over the years. I've never heard a writer talk about that kind of strategy or even have a strategy period, other than like just try to get into print. But you have really made an explicit effort to write in other languages, to pursue readerships in other countries, and to try to globalize your readership.
Well, we used the Hindi language in the latest play, The Conductor, where we gave some Indian actors roles that they wouldn't get from Bollywood or whatever they call that junk that they do over there. So I studied Hindi, and there's a Hindi language that's introduced in that play called The Conductor, which is about how some Indians are bringing the caste system to the United States, like Ramaswamy and people like that. And that play ran. That was a substitute play for the Slave Love Caviar. They said, well, bring another play. So I wrote The Conductor about how these billionaires are influencing school board selections. Like they were behind a recall of school board members out here because they felt that they were too prone to embrace diversity. And I tracked that down to 2 or 3 billionaires from Silicon Valley who were behind that whole thing. So that play was performed at the Theater for the New City. The new play goes into the origin of hip hop.
And what is it called?
It's called the Shine Challenge 2024. There's a tradition of toasts that come from the criminal underworld and written anonymously. And some of them surfaced around 1912, in the 1900s. What the hip hoppers did was to add audio equipment. I mean, they're done in verse. They have the same qualities, the same boasting, some of the same daring material and same misogyny in a way. But see, I think it's a mistake by some scholars who say that hip hop is 50 years old. It's older than that. I study Yoruba language. You find some features of hip hop in West African oral tradition. But this particular play is about and one of the reasons I wrote this play, this happened like I wrote the Basquiat plays, overheard conversation and some guy telling me something. I asked members of 3 generations of Blacks had they heard of this toast, and they hadn't. And I said, they have the same thing they do with the Irish and the Italians. They've assimilated some of our origin stories out of us. Because this toast was very famous. I mean, people had different variations of it, but it was all about the Titanic. And this a toast arose. I think it's about maybe 30 lines. This toast arose where they had a black man on the Titanic, and he was a stoker down at the very bottom, shoveling coal for the steam. He's the first one to notice that the ship is taking water. And he goes to upstairs, and in the first class you had the Astors and the Strausses. The Strausses owned Macy's department store. You had all these millionaires up there on first class, and the thing was designed like a 5-star hotel. That's what was the ambition of the builders of the Titanic. He tells the captain that the ship is taking water. Captain says, we have all this great, beautiful equipment down there, and that can't be true. And then finally, the ship is sinking. This character named Shine goes upstairs and dives overboard and starts swimming toward Harlem. Okay. And all these millionaires are on the deck offering him all kind of bribes, like, and if he would save them. And he says, get your ass in the water and swim like me. So now the Worcester group is they're doing a version of that. They're doing Toast. They're not doing the complete Shine. What I've taken from maybe 35 lines is I've written a 99 script play, drawing out some of the subjects covered, like immigration, Edwardian values, engineering. I've drawn all those out and focus upon them. And I've written a play, Shine, the Shine Challenge, because I want someone in the future generation to even enlarge upon what I've done.
Well, you are a busy guy and you get a lot done. And I read that I want to say your wife said that you work everywhere, in bed, on the sofa, even in front of the television, often from before dawn until you break for an afternoon piano session. I guess you play the piano or you take a walk, but you're still going. You have not stopped since you started, really, right?
Yeah, well, old age is not a death sentence. You know what I mean? I look at Biden. He's just a youngster. In comparison, I'll be 86 next month.
Wow, you look great.
Well, thank you. And he says, they're saying, "Oh, Biden's too old." This guy's running the world. I mean, he brought NATO together. I mean, he's done all the great things. And they say, well, he looks like he's stuttering, and they put him on this clown, this buffoon. This guy is really sort of like mentally ill. Is getting all the press and media, so that's how it goes. So I guess we have a little competitive thing. She's gotten nominated for a Los Angeles Press Club award for 2 years in a row, and I've been writing essays for 50 years maybe, and I've never got one of those.
Well, get to it. Come on.
Yeah, I gotta really shape up and do better.
Well, you mentioned this earlier about the New York Times not reviewing some of your recent books. And there was a line that I read as I was prepping that I want to read to you and hear you comment on, because it is a unique station that you occupy as a quote, like it says, you live a strange double life as, quote, a canonical author of the 20th century, author of Mumbo Jumbo, hailed by Harold Bloom as one of the 500 most important books in the Western canon. That's yours. Mm-hmm. But you're also an underground voice now in the 21st century. I don't know if I can think of any author off the top of my head who occupies both of those strata. That's an interesting place to be. Is it a frustrating place to be?
Well, I have a black audience that'll be with me until the last dog dies. I get constant stream of awards from them. This year I got the Hurston Wright Award, this great ceremony in Washington. I wasn't able to attend. I attended by Zoom. But I continue to get honors from black audiences and black institutions. For my plays, for example, the Otherppl Awards, my director got my actors get awards. So I'm not underground to them. I'm not underground in the globe. For example, my daughter and I published a book out of the house here that we're going to print, and looks just as good as the stuff that they published in New York. And it includes testimonies from writers that we know all over the world about their experiences with COVID. China, Africa, Europe, all these writers. And so we're going to publish that.
Is it like an oral history or?
Yeah.
Oh,
people
interesting.
Experiencing COVID. So our situation is not like that of the Black writers of the 1940s and 50s, because when New York publishers stopped publishing them, they were done. When Richard Wright's last book was rejected, I read the book, Island of Hallucinations. He was done. When Chester Himes stopped being published by New York publishers, they were done. But now with the kind of print technology we have right now, everybody can get a book out there, and you can get all sorts of places to publish your book. And there's a situation called print on demand. I got about 5 or 6 books by other authors published through print on demand. So we're guaranteed a sort of like permanent publication for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, it's more democratic. I
think so.
That's for sure. It's easier
for
people to get a book out there than it ever has been, and to get distributed. You can sell a book online anywhere in the world practically. It's and ebooks and the whole thing. So that's a positive, but it's hard to find a readership.
Well, I was lucky enough to come along when publishers were still publishing experimental books. I think in the 1970s, the salespersons took over. For example, I was able to get Doubleday in 67, 69, 72 to publish 3 of my experimental books. Those books would not be published today. Mumbo Jumbo, 50 years old, wouldn't be published today. So the salespersons took over. I got Norman Pritchard's Matrix, N.H. Pritchard's Matrix published by Doubleday. That's considered an avant-garde book, and now he's considered one of the antecedents of the language poets. So the salespersons took over. I submitted a book. I had a young Black editor ask me to submit a book to one of his publishers where he was working. And the salesperson said it would only draw critical praise and awards.
That's it?
So I think the salespersons have taken over.
Well, that means we've got to create new roads, right? New ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring to me that you're still at it and doing these things and experimenting and raising hell. And I'm really grateful for the time. I congratulate you on this play, The Slave Who Loved Caviar. I'm curious to know what the plans are with it. Is it going to be, I know there are little stagings happening here and there. Like, is there any vision for what's going to happen with it in a formal sense?
Well, we made a video of it, which we plan to put on YouTube.
Oh, so anybody can watch it.
Yeah, so we'll let you know.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the time, and I wish you well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this.